Have you ever wondered why, despite working hard, most people remain poor? Have you ever stopped to think about how the world is structured, where a small group controls nearly everything, while billions struggle to get by with almost nothing? This isn't a coincidence. It's not bad luck. And it's certainly not your fault. Karl Marx was one of the first to confront this harsh reality head-on. His ideas didn't just challenge the system, they exposed it. A system designed not to uplift everyone, but to keep many in poverty for the benefit of a few. What you'll learn in this video might change how you view society, your work, and your own place in the world. To understand Marx's view of poverty, we need to go to the core of his philosophy, historical materialism. This isn't just a theory, it's a powerful lens that reveals something fundamental. History, according to Marx, isn't driven by ideas or beliefs. It's driven by the concrete conditions of life, by how people survive, work, and produce what they need to live. It's not religion or philosophy that shapes society, but the way human labor is organized, who controls production, who benefits, and who gets left behind. Unlike philosophers like Hegel, who believed that ideas shaped history, Marx flipped the script. He argued that it's not human consciousness that defines life, but the material conditions of life that shape our consciousness. In simple terms, before we can think about life, we have to live it, and that means having food, shelter, and security. Marx's thinking was shaped by Hegel and Feuerbach, but he didn't just adopt their ideas, he transformed them. From Hegel, he took the method of dialectics, the idea that the world is in constant change and contradiction. But he rejected Hegel's idealism, grounding his analysis in real-world conditions. From Feuerbach, he took the focus on material human existence. But Marx pushed further, it's not enough to understand the world, we have to change it. This fusion became the foundation of dialectical historical materialism, the critical tool Marx used to analyze and ultimately challenge capitalism. Central to this theory is the idea that every society has two layers, a base and a superstructure. The base, or infrastructure, is made up of the economy, the forces and relations of production. The superstructure includes politics, law, culture, and ideology. And here's the key point, the economic base shapes everything above it. That means the way wealth is created, who owns what, who works for whom, directly influences the laws we follow, the values we're taught, and the beliefs we hold. So when you're taught certain morals in school, or see the same messages repeated in the media and even in religion, it's not random. It reflects the interests of those who control the economic system. Capitalism isn't eternal, it hasn't always existed, and it won't last forever. According to Karl Marx, every system of production throughout history, from slavery to feudalism to capitalism, came into being by replacing the one before it, usually through crisis and transformation. And in each of these systems, there's been one constant, a deep divide between those who own the means of production and those who sell their labor to survive. Landowners and slaves, lords and peasants, capitalists and workers, different names, same structure. In capitalism, this divide shows up as the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The bourgeoisie owns factories, land, and capital. The proletariat owns nothing but their ability to work, their labor power. And here's where the modern poverty story begins. Capitalism is incredibly efficient at generating wealth, that's true. But that wealth doesn't get shared. It's concentrated at the top, leaving a few with too much and many with too little. Marx argued that this isn't an accident, it's built into the system itself. Workers create value. They build, produce, and provide services. But they only receive a fraction of what their labor actually generates. The rest? That's called surplus value, and it's what capitalists extract as profit. So, let's be clear, poverty isn't a mistake of capitalism. It's the engine that makes it work. For profits to exist, someone has to be underpaid. For wealth to concentrate, others must go without. Capitalism doesn't just tolerate inequality, it requires it. And this isn't just poetic language, it's a machine made of metal and muscle, running on sweat and blood. The rise of the modern working class, the proletariat, came at a huge human cost. Through what Marx called primitive accumulation, countless peasants were kicked off their lands. Traditional ways of life were destroyed. Families were pushed into overcrowded cities, forced to take low-paid factory jobs. This violent shift gave birth to the industrial working class, the fuel for the Industrial Revolution. But it also created something new, mass urban poverty. Cities became overcrowded, disease-ridden, and dangerous. People worked 16-hour shifts. Children labored alongside adults. Entire families lived in dark, cramped rooms. It was a nightmare disguised as progress. And beyond poverty, there was something even more destructive: alienation. Work no longer felt human. The worker became just another tool in the machine, disconnected from what they made, how they made it, and why they were making it at all. Marx identified 4 levels of alienation: from the product, from the process, from oneself, and from others. The worker becomes a stranger in their own life, detached from their purpose, their creativity, and their community. Work becomes not a source of meaning, but a daily punishment. And somehow, society tells us this is all normal. Want to understand how this all connects to the world we live in today? Subscribe to the channel. Here we break down Marx's insights and show how they still explain today's biggest economic and social problems. If you've ever felt like the system is rigged, you're not wrong. Let's unpack why. In capitalism, poverty isn't some unfortunate side effect, it's a built-in mechanism. It doesn't just happen by chance, it's deliberately reproduced, generation after generation. Children born into poverty start life at a disadvantage, with limited access to healthcare, quality education, decent housing, and real opportunities. They're funneled into the same cycle of low-paying jobs, instability, and deprivation. It's a loop that repeats endlessly. Meanwhile, everything around you, the media, schools, religion, even government institutions, pushes a single message: that your struggles are your fault. They say you didn't work hard enough, didn't study, weren't disciplined. But this narrative isn't truth, it's ideology. A powerful illusion that hides the real chains keeping people down. So let's ask the question that matters: why are so many people poor? Karl Marx gave his answer over 150 years ago, and it's one that still makes the ruling class uncomfortable. If this message speaks to you, drop a comment or share your name and city. It helps us see how far this conversation can go. Marx also foresaw something we live with today: culture becoming a product. Guy Debord would later call it the spectacle, a world where even pain is turned into entertainment. Poverty becomes a trending topic, a TV show, a song, a fashion statement. The suffering of the poor is packaged, sold, and consumed, but never solved. Even education plays a role in this cycle. Marx believed that schools often serve as tools of the state, not to free minds, but to train laborers. Public education is often underfunded, filled with irrelevant content, and lacking in critical thinking. It doesn't uplift the poor, it conditions them to accept their place. If you're born at the bottom, chances are you'll stay there. Because poverty isn't just experienced, it's passed down. It's taught. The same applies to health. Diseases that should be preventable still kill millions, not because medicine doesn't exist, but because the poor can't access it. Life expectancy in wealthy areas is far higher than in poor ones. Overcrowded hospitals, lack of sanitation, poor diets, these all deepen the divide. And once again, society blames the individual: poor choices, bad habits, laziness. But the deeper, structural causes? They're almost never addressed. And then there's housing, one of the clearest examples of systemic exclusion. Millions live in slums, makeshift shelters, or on the streets. Real estate and urban space are owned and privatized. Cities are designed to include some, and push others out. But the periphery isn't just a location. It's an economic, political, and symbolic space. The city becomes a battlefield, a daily reminder to the poor that they don't belong. segregation by design, isolation by force, invisibility by intent. At this point, it's undeniable, poverty is what keeps capitalism alive. It's not a flaw in the system, it's the fuel. Without poverty, the machine stops. No profit, no leverage, no control. And here's the part that's even harder to swallow, even the solutions the system offers are designed to keep things exactly as they are. Capitalism is incredibly skilled at faking compassion. It creates the illusion of change, offering minimal reforms, feel-good policies, and promises of progress, just enough to stop people from rising up, but never enough to change the system at its core. Marx called this the ideological reproduction of the system, when tools that look like they help the oppressed actually serve to keep them oppressed. Think about it, welfare programs, diversity initiatives, talk of meritocracy, and social mobility campaigns. They don't fix the root problem, they just relieve the pressure, temporarily. And when the system gives you something, it's not out of kindness, it's a strategy. A calculated move to avoid revolt. For Marx, the state under capitalism, the bourgeois state, isn't a neutral player. It's not some fair referee looking out for everyone. It's a tool used by the ruling class to maintain its dominance. So even when policies seem to favor the poor, they never go far enough to challenge the core of the system, private ownership of the means of production. Take welfare, for example. Sure, some income, food, and basic services might be distributed, but no one's touching land reform. No one's questioning who owns the factories, the farmland, or the tech platforms. The structure stays intact. The poor are turned into dependents, not participants in transformation. The system protects itself by handing out crumbs, and selling them as victories. The truth? Poverty isn't solved, it's managed. And then there's meritocracy, the modern myth that everyone starts at the same line and success is purely about effort. But Marx would tear that story apart. How can you claim equality when some children grow up in underfunded schools, without enough food, without healthcare, while others grow up surrounded by resources, support, and safety? One group is fighting to survive. The other is preparing to win. That's not merit, that's privilege in disguise. Meritocracy is a convenient lie. It praises the rich as if they earned everything, and blames the poor as if they deserved nothing. It hides a deeply unequal system behind a mask of fairness. Even when progressive reforms are introduced, better labor laws, social protections, access to technology, they only go so far. And Marx warned us, as long as the bourgeoisie owns the means of production, any progress made under capitalism is fragile. All it takes is one economic crisis, one change in government, one market crash, and those hard-won rights can vanish. Because in capitalism, profit always comes first. And whenever workers' rights interfere with that profit, the system pushes back, hard. Marx also foresaw a phenomenon that would become central in the 20th century, co-optation of the struggle. Unions, workers' parties, social movements, all instruments of resistance, were born with revolutionary potential, but the system learned to absorb, institutionalize, and neutralize them. Many leaders began acting more like guardians of order than rupturers. The discourse of change turned into electoral rhetoric, critique became marketing, the structure remained intact. This neutralization extends to culture. What was once militant art is absorbed as product, protest lyrics become commercial soundtracks, revolutionary images printed on mass-market t-shirts. The system consumes critique and transforms it into merchandise. It sells its own condemnation at a profit. What about technology? Marx didn't live long enough to witness the digital world, but his analysis of technique as a productive force applies perfectly. Technology, which could free humans from exhausting labor, is used to deepen exploitation, automation, big data. All this increases productivity, but the fruits are not shared. Millions lose jobs while profit multiplies in a few hands. Leisure time is not redistributed. The workday doesn't shrink. On the contrary, the 21st century worker is more pressured, surveilled, and precarious. Marx already warned, capital does not seek human progress, it seeks profitability. And now we return to the root, the means of production. All society's wealth, factories, banks, land, technology, is in a minority's hands. This minority decides what is produced, how it is produced, and for whom. Decides who works, how much they earn, where they live, what they eat. As long as this structure does not transform, all solutions will be patches on a rotting fabric. Marx was clear, it is not enough to reform capitalism, it must be overcome. How? The answer lies in class struggle. This is the backbone of Marxist thought. The entire history of humanity is the history of the struggle between exploiters and exploited. There is no neutrality, either you are on the side of those who profit from your sweat, or of those who bleed to produce the wealth of others. When the working class organizes, it awakens to its role in production and understands it can also own the means of production, that it can move from being a cog to becoming a motor, that it can break the cycle. This kind of awareness doesn't just appear out of nowhere, it has to be built, step by step. Marx called it class consciousness. It's the moment when a worker realizes that their personal struggle isn't just personal, it's shared. That their pain, their frustration, their exploitation is happening to millions of others just like them. And that recognition changes everything. Because once people stop seeing their situation as isolated, and start seeing it as collective, they stop feeling powerless, and start becoming powerful. This awakening turns the oppressed into active players in history. And once that class consciousness matures, it doesn't ask for permission, it stands up and fights. Marx wasn't talking in metaphors when he spoke about class struggle. For him, it wasn't theory, it was the engine behind all historical change. Revolution, in Marxist thought, isn't chaos, it's a necessary, deliberate break with a system that creates poverty and inequality. And this revolution? It's not just about taking to the streets. It's about taking political power, consciously, as a class. That's what Marx meant by the dictatorship of the proletariat, not authoritarianism as we understand it today, but a form of rule where the working majority, not the capitalist elite, controls the means of production and the institutions that shape society. Marx saw this phase as essential, it's how we dismantle the old order, overcome resistance from the powerful, and begin to lay the foundation for something new. The very first step. Ending private ownership of the means of production. Because the real root of poverty and exploitation isn't laziness or bad luck, it's ownership. When a small group controls the land, the factories, the technology, the infrastructure, everyone else is forced to work under their terms. Sell your labor, or starve. The alternative? Social ownership. That means the things we all depend on, the tools of production, are held collectively, not privately. Managed not for profit, but for human need. From this shift comes a radically different way of organizing society, collective production and fair distribution. No more systems built around individual accumulation and endless competition. Instead, production is planned to serve everyone, to meet essential needs like food, housing, healthcare, education, and even leisure. Because true freedom isn't just about not being poor, it's about having the time and resources to live a full, dignified life. And to get there, education and emancipation are key. Marx believed that under capitalism, people are shaped to be cogs in a machine, disconnected from themselves, from others, and from any real sense of purpose. Education becomes training for obedience, not liberation. But in a truly free society, education would be universal, public, and transformative. Not just a path to employment, but a path to human flourishing, nurturing intellectual, moral, artistic, and social potential in every person, regardless of class. This kind of education, free, critical, and truly inclusive, is the foundation for building a society of aware, empowered citizens. People capable of thinking for themselves, questioning power, and collectively managing their own lives. Another pillar of Marx's vision is freedom and self-determination. But not the individualist freedom that capitalism sells, he meant real, collective freedom. Marx believed in self-management, where workers don't just follow orders, but take part in the decisions that shape production, distribution, and the institutions they're part of. No more blind obedience to market forces that dictate our wages, jobs, and choices. With collective autonomy, we unlock the potential for a life free from exploitation, where rights are real and dignity is non-negotiable. Marx was also very clear about something that still resonates today: Band-Aid reforms don't change power structures. Welfare, charity, and symbolic gestures may provide relief, but they're often used to pacify rather than empower. Marx saw these as tools of control. They keep people dependent, distracted, and distant from revolutionary transformation. Real change doesn't come from permission, it comes from confrontation. He made a clear distinction between his scientific communism and the utopian visions that came before him. For Marx, revolution wasn't some dream of a perfect world, it was the natural result of the contradictions built into capitalism. As inequality grows, as wealth concentrates, as class consciousness develops, revolution becomes not just possible, but necessary. And not as an end, but as a new beginning. A new era, where the means of production are collectively controlled. A society without classes. Without exploitation. Without manufactured poverty. In this world, people are finally free to become who they truly are, not bound by market logic or economic chains, but supported by systems built for human life. Today, we still live in the world of contradictions Marx described. Financialization, where wealth is created not through work, but through speculation, only deepens inequality. Big banks and investment funds hoard massive profits while millions face unemployment, exclusion, and instability. This isn't a flaw, it's how the system works. It concentrates wealth at the top while stripping away any hope of real improvement for the rest. Neoliberalism adds another layer. By cutting public services, privatizing everything, and shrinking the role of the state, it removes the little protection many people had. Health, education, and welfare become privileges, not rights. And again, the blame is pushed onto individuals, not the system. Work has become increasingly precarious. Outsourcing, informal jobs, stripped-down labor rights, all ways to make poverty sustainable for capital. Even technology, instead of freeing us, has been used to replace workers, increase control, and expand the reserve army of the unemployed, keeping wages low and fear high. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed it all. The poor were hit hardest, not because of bad luck, but because the system was never built to protect them. Inequality soared. Governments stepped back. Hunger, exclusion, and instability grew. Marx also warned of capitalism's relationship with environmental destruction. The poor are always the most vulnerable when the planet suffers, because they rely directly on land, water, and air. But these resources are exploited for short-term profits, putting survival itself at risk. That's why for Marx, social justice isn't just legal equality, it's about real redistribution. It means changing the entire structure of how resources, power, and opportunity are shared. Because without that, there's no dignity. And no future. Fortunately, people haven't stopped fighting. All over the world, social movements, unions, and community organizations continue to build alternatives inspired by Marx's ideas, demanding housing, land, work, income, and human rights. Marx's diagnosis of capitalism still holds. And so does the urgency to act. If you want to dig deeper, go to the source. Read the economic and philosophic manuscripts, Capital, the German Ideology, and the Communist Manifesto. Watch documentaries, films, and stories that show the reality of the working class. Push for Marx to be taught in schools, not to preach, but to encourage critical thinking, so that new generations understand where poverty and inequality really come from. And above all, get involved. Join movements. Build networks. Organize. Resist. Solidarity isn't a slogan, it's a strategy. Because the future depends on us. Only through unity and struggle can we overcome poverty and create a world that's fair, free, and humane, just as Marx imagined. That's the living legacy of Marxism, a vision that continues to inspire those who refuse to accept poverty as fate. If you made it this far, you're part of the change. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the next video on screen. Let's keep this conversation alive.